video off if you don't want to be shown, that's fine. I am currently standing on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria. It's a place that's really special to me. I have a really strong connection to place here, and I'm so grateful for the traditional owners of this land for looking after it and protecting it. It's provided such a sanctuary to me during this year, during our lockdown times. So I would very much honour and pay respects to the traditional owners of these lands, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to all of the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which you're joining us from today. I'm so delighted to have our guest speakers today, the CEO of Climate Council, Amanda McKenzie, and Climate Councillor, Professor Lesley Hughes, who have gratefully given us some time to speak with us today. And I think this is going to be a great conversation. And just a little bit of background for those of you that were on the call. About 2 conversations ago, we were talking with Georgie Cornish, the Director of Bushfire Recovery in South Australia. And we had some conversations on the side around climate change and these incredible bushfires. And there was a request by one of the members to say, can we please have a session talking about climate change? And I immediately thought, I know 2 fabulous women who might just say yes and come along and join the conversation. And they said yes, and they're here today. So, you know, bringing that to fruition, I'm so grateful and so delighted that Amanda and Lesley have joined us. What we're going to do is the normal conversation format is I will introduce Lesley and Amanda, kick off with some questions. We'll go till about maybe 5:30. We'll see where that goes. And then we'll open it up to questions from all of you. If you'd like to ask your questions in the chat box, feel free to do so as we go along. Otherwise, we can come to you and you can ask your question directly of Amanda and Lesley when we get there. So I'll start with Lesley, because I always put Amanda first. So I'm going to start with Lesley first. So Lesley, you will have seen in the profile I sent around, Professor Lesley Hughes is a distinguished Professor of Biology and the Pro Vice Chancellor, the Research Integrity and Development at Macquarie University. Her research is mainly focused on the impacts of climate change on species and ecosystems. She is a former Federal Climate Commissioner and former lead author in the IPCC's 4th and 5th assessment reports. She is a founding councillor with the Climate Council of Australia, a director for WWF Australia, and a member of the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists. And I've had the absolute honour of being in some sessions and conversations with Lesley throughout the course of the last couple of years, and I have learned so much about climate change and weather and environment from her, so she'll share some of her knowledge today. Now with Amanda, now I also had the privilege to hear from Amanda a number of times, and I remember at the Climate Council 5-year anniversary, I sat down the front because I had a question to ask, and I got to sit next to your mum, Amanda, so I feel like one of the family.
Look at that now.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Amanda, she is one of the best known public commentators on the climate crisis in Australia. Aren't we fortunate? She's the CEO and co-founder of the Climate Council, an independent climate change education and advocacy body. Previously, Amanda co-founded the Australian Youth Climate Coalition and has served on renewable energy expert panels for the Queensland and Northern Territory governments. Amanda was the founding chair of the Centre for Australian Progress and is a former board director at Plan International Australia and the Whitlam Institute. She holds an honours degree in law from Monash and an arts degree from Melbourne Uni, and she has won numerous awards, including being recognised as one of Westpac's 100 Women of Influence and a finalist in Telstra Young Businesswomen of the Year Awards. So grateful and delighted to have you both with us today. And let's, you can call Amanda McKenzie, and I'll be Amanda Lamont for the purposes of proceedings today. So thank you so much for joining us. If I could start, Amanda, and I know you've told the story many times, but we've probably got a mix of members with the Women in Emergencies Network who understand the Climate Council and what it's about. But could you just give us a bit of a background about how it came into being and what you've been up to in the last, it would be 6 or so years now? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, to take you back a few years, you might remember before the Abbott government was elected, they had numerous promises on climate change to disband a range of different programs, policies and institutions. And one of the promises was to abolish the Climate Commission. So the Climate Commission had been set up to provide expert information on climate change to the general public. I was a senior communications advisor there, and Lesley and a range of other experts were commissioners. And we had spent 2 or 3 years travelling around Australia, providing that information to the public, doing town hall forums, producing reports, doing lots of media. And I think we were doing our job a little bit too well, because Tony Abbott had decided that this was going to be one of the key things that they would do on climate change. And indeed it was the first act of the Abbott government was to abolish the Climate Commission, including taking down the website that had numerous resources on climate change and deleting all of them. Because we knew it was going to happen, but we didn't know how or when, we had some plans in place, and the councillors and I had all talked about what we would do afterwards. And the plan was that we could potentially set up a not-for-profit organisation. And as soon as we were abolished this, we confirmed it. And 4 days later, we went out on a limb and said to the public, will you fund us? So what I'd done in that sort of 4-day period was create a basic website, some videos and a crowdfunding platform. And then Lesley and the other councillors went out in public and said, hey, we're creating the Climate Council, will you get on board? And it was a crazy sort of 24-hour period where we put the website up at 12 o'clock at night, and at 12:01 we had the first donation from Peter over in Perth for $15. I don't know how he got the website. And then a Twitter conversation sort of started through the night. So by 6 a.m. we'd raised $1,000 an hour over the night. Oh, this is a good start. And some of the conservative commentators, as it came out in the press, were saying, ha ha, look how little they've raised at that point. When we done the press conference, the media storm really came after it, and there was this sort of cyclone of media coverage from Australia and around the world on, it's because it was so unusual, a scientific body trying to reestablish itself as a not-for-profit during a crowdfunding campaign. And by the end of the day, we'd raised $500,000, and PayPal shut us down because they thought we must be money laundering. We were raising money so fast. And the conservative commentators stopped talking about it at about the $100,000 mark and just went quiet at that point. But by the end of 10 days, we'd raised $1.3 million, which was more than the budget of the previous Climate Commission, and allowed us to set up a fully independent not-for-profit organisation. And over the years, now almost 7 years, we've been able to build that organisation into one that is very multifaceted. So we still do the research work, we do the communications work, but we've taken that communications work much more broadly. So we support other groups that are important to get their voices out. So the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action, and Greg Mullins has been a key example of that, but others in other areas. We do detailed programs around getting down emissions. So our flagship program on that is the Cities Power Partnership. So working with 135 local governments to get their emissions down and work with local mayors on their advocacy work to state and federal government. And then we have a full advocacy program as well around, particularly at a state government level, around pushing for really clean jobs in this environment through renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, and a range of other things.
Thank you, Amanda. Now, Lesley, something that you said the other night, we were on a meeting together with a group of people, and I hadn't realised so much how bushfires were a strong influence in a lot of the early reports of the Commission and now the Climate Council. Could you just tell us a little bit about the link that you were researching and finding between bushfires in Australia and the work on climate change?
Well, thanks, Amanda. As Amanda said, we raised all of this money in the first week, and it was very exciting and everything. And then the pressure started, because then we realised that we had all this public money, but we had really nothing to offer for that money. So the pressure on us to produce some decent content on the website or a report, we felt very, very intensely. I mean, we knew our supporters didn't expect something straight away, but we nonetheless, I think, felt the pressure that we had to start producing. So this was in late September in 2013, and We were in a very dry and hot period then. It looked like it was going to be a very hot and dry summer. And so when we did get together, we collectively decided that our very first report should be on climate change and bushfires, because we were anticipating a bad bushfire season. So at that time, of course, apart from Amanda and a couple of volunteers, we didn't have any staff like we do now. So I just sort of sat down and started researching and writing this report. And I was actually writing it when the Blue Mountains bushfires broke out, and was getting called up by the media saying, well, look, can you send us something about bushfires and climate change? And I'm sort of frantically saying, well, look, could you just wait a month or so, because my report's not finished yet. So I remember, Amanda might remember this, we got together in the Climate Council office and had this whiteboard and decided, well, we better put something out. Well, we'll put out some sort of press release. And we, in 10 minutes or so, dreamed up this press release with dot points, which went out about the link between climate change and bushfires. And it got enormous media pickup because of the, you know, timing is everything. So that was in the sort of late September, early October. And then that first report on bushfires came out in the November. And that was the first of the Climate Council's reports. Since then, I think we've done 12 altogether, around about. Amanda, I stopped counting, frankly. So we keep producing bushfire reports. Sometimes they're state-based, sometimes they're associated with other extreme events like heat waves and droughts. But it's really been probably our most consistent single topic that we've ever done media and science on, would be the link between climate change and bushfires. And it's been really interesting, the interaction with the media, because, you know, the media has very, very short memories. In all of those launches, and I've probably been at most of them, at every single press conference, we basically say the same thing. And I've only ever been asked by one journalist, well, what's different about this report compared to the last one? And I've only been asked that question once. And I said, well, actually, you know, not much. You know, we've updated the climate weather stuff, but really it's the same message. But it just shows that you can keep putting out the same message over and over and over again. And it's something I think that we've learnt with the council, and Amanda talks about this in her communications guides, that repetition is really, really important. You can't expect to just deliver a message, no matter how powerful you think it is, and expect it to have a really big impact. You've actually got to deliver the same message over and over and over again. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Now, the question that I asked at the 5-year birthday celebrations for the Climate Council was something that, just to segue from your point, Lesley, was that me working in a disaster resilience, disaster risk reduction context, I felt like I was, and a lot of women in this call today will be feeling the same. We go on and on and on about preparedness, having a preparedness plan, an emergency plan, reducing our risks, building our resilience. And we say the same thing over and over again, and we have commissions and inquiries. And the question I asked at the Climate Council event was, you know, have you got any tips for me for having to retell your climate change story that we can use? But I think what you've just said, Lesley, is there's no silver bullet here. We have to keep messaging and keep messaging and keep messaging. And yeah. I sort of wish that at some point we're going to say it and something's going to kick off and people will be listening. But I guess what I'm hearing is, you've got to keep.
Look, I think after the last summer's experience, I think, you know, and it's, you know, our efforts and the efforts of your group and lots of people, I think we have got through. I mean, interestingly, you picked up on what that first report was called. We called it Be Prepared, you know, climate change and the Australian bushfire threat. And in fact, I think about the first 6 or 7 reports had that as the title, Be Prepared. Because that's what we were trying to do. You know, we're sending the message that you've got to do 2 things. You've got to be prepared for the immediate impact as much as you can be, but also we have to deal with the root cause of the problem, so that these twin messages are the messages that we deliver really every time we write about extreme events or any other impact of climate change. But you've just got to say it over and over again, and then suddenly it's part of everyday life and nobody questions it anymore. And it's hard to pinpoint the timing of when that happens, but it does happen. And I think, you know, I like to think that the Climate Council, with our drumbeat on the impact of climate change on all extreme events, you know, has pretty much eventually got through. And if there's people that it hasn't got through to, well, we'll never get through to those people.
If I can just build on that,
yeah.
Amanda, I think for the challenge in sort of this persuasion is a number of things. One is making it relevant to people, and when the bushfires are happening is when it's most relevant, but it's sort of the farthest away point from preparedness in a way. And I think I'd be thinking about that as a cyclical thing, in that when the bushfires are fresh in people's mind is the time to talk about the preparedness for next time, and cementing some of that. The reality is the further away the fires are, the less people are concerned about it and have it top of mind. And I think that's just a question of human nature, the relevancy piece. So it's about trying to make it contemporary for people. I think the second thing is about the messenger and who is telling the story. So one thing we've tried to do with the Climate Council over the years, and I mentioned this briefly, is to think about who is going to be the messenger for the audience. So engaging the emergency leaders, so former fire chiefs and emergency chiefs, who we thought was really important in terms of cutting across the political discourse. The people that were firmly outside of politics, clearly didn't have a vested interest and were highly trusted. And we try and do that across the board. So we use doctors, we use farmers, we use solar installers, people that have a vested interest in whatever it is. And I'm sure you and your members do that too, but it's worth something to always keep in mind, is just putting yourself in the shoes of the audience and saying, who would be the most persuasive and how do I make the issue most relevant?
Actually, Amanda, for those of you that aren't aware, the Climate Council has a book club, and you should look it up and jump on if you're interested. But I was on one of the book club discussions, Amanda, and somebody asked you the question around how to have influential conversations. And I took something away that you said, and it has been so liberating for me. What you said was, you know, you work out which conversations you've got an opportunity to make a difference and which ones to almost just walk away from. Yeah. And I felt like I was trying to have every battle with every conversation with every person about climate change, and I was getting worn down. Now I just know where I'm going to have potentially a win, know when I'm not, and let it go. And it's just freed up a lot of emotional energy for me to have good conversations. So that has been really helpful. Yeah, sitting around the dinner table, I know there are people that I'm never going to convince, and I was trying to. I now stopped trying to convince those people. I'm focusing my energies on creating that groundswell. So that's been really helpful from that perspective. Now, I want to just talk about a little experience that I had, and it leads into the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. In a former role that I had with the National Council for Emergency Services, we were developing a position paper on climate change for the emergency management sector with the key emergency service organisations nationally. And we were engaging at commissioner level, and we wanted to agree some talking points. And these were developed the 2018-19 bushfire season. Talking points for all of the agencies to talk to when the media would say, is this...
I'll go in here so no one else has to listen. I said I'll go in here.
Sorry, I just turned that off. So what we wanted was had to have a consistent voice about climate change from the emergency services sector when the media would ask, is this about climate change? Now, it was really hard to wrangle those organisations at a commissioner level to agree what we would say. And we finally got somewhere, but it was very, very challenging because we had, and I'll name states, we had Tasmania at one end of the spectrum wanting to really be vocal and talk about climate change and the impacts on disasters and bushfires. And we had other states like New South Wales, which had to have a softer approach about how they spoke about it. And what that is leading into is a message for our members on this conversation today. A lot of us work in emergency service organisations or in emergency management roles in local, state, Commonwealth government, SES, fire services. And have you got any tips about how we can have conversations with our peers, with our managers, with our senior leaders in our emergency organisations to let them know that we are passionate about this issue and we want our organisations to be talking about it and not hiding behind it's political and we can't conversation. Have you got any tips for those of us that are listening today?
I can jump in first, Lesley, and then you can have a go. I think it's important to emphasise to people that are worried about the politicisation of it, just how many people agree. There's a lot of public polling now, and this has been true for years actually, that shows that the vast majority of the Australian public agree that climate change is happening, it's influencing extreme weather events, and they want something done. This has come out of Rebecca Huntley's recent research, the Essential Media poll, the Lowy Institute poll. They're all consistent in showing that, and I think that's a useful tool to make people feel less vulnerable that they're putting their head above the parapet. And Scott Morrison actually acknowledged over the last summer that climate change influenced the fires, although it took some months and, you know, a huge proportion of Australia to burn for that to happen. So in a way, I think that's an important shift. Most of the states have come a long way too. So I think there's one piece which is showing how much agreement there is. And now, you know, you can point to business, you can point to the emergency leaders, a whole range of different people. But I think there's also a moral compass that you can draw on as well, asking people, you know, you're in a role that has an influence at a time of great consequence. We need to be brave at this moment. Let's not regret the decisions that we make now when it's impossible to change things later. I think drawing people on their personal sense of purpose, if they've got children or grandchildren, reminding them of the consequences for them, because we all are in roles where we have a circle of influence around us and we need to be brave at this moment in history. And I think people were generally reluctant to sort of talk to people like that, but I think it makes people stop and think a little bit and say, actually, I can do something in my role. I could do something more than what I'm doing now. It doesn't necessarily mean I go from, 1 to 10. It could be me, I go from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3. So what more can I do?
Yeah, I'd like to build on that. I think talking to people about, in some ways, about their legacy with their children and their grandchildren is actually really important. I've had conversations with people that were also reluctant to speak up, and I've sort of taken the tack, and maybe it's a bit of emotional blackmail, I suppose, but whatever works, and saying, well, look, I do what I do because I've got 2 children, and they're going to, and their kids are going to live, if they have them, into the next century. And at the moment, the next century, in fact, second half of this century, even before, is looking like a really dangerous place. And I couldn't live with myself unless I did absolutely everything I can in my own way, with my own skills and my own time, to avoid that. And as Amanda said, not everybody can get up and give a lecture on climate science, and that's not what's needed anyway, but everybody's got something. Our mutual friend, Anna Rose, often says, well, you can give your time, your talent, or your treasure. So, which I think is a great way of putting it. Even if you're too reluctant to speak up, you can put time in, or you can give money, or you can support another organisation. And when people come to me and say, well, look, what can I do? The first thing I say is, look, don't try to do it on your own. Find a group of like-minded people, and obviously this group is like-minded, and work with them and support each other to make a difference. Having a community around you that agrees with you and supports you does make you braver. And I found that with the Climate Council. It's become like, I'm sure Amanda feels the same way. It's like another family. And whenever I am feeling frustrated, I actually draw a lot of comfort on being in that group. And we're all very different. We all do different things, but we have an absolutely shared agenda of what we're trying to achieve. And that's a really wonderful thing.
So that's very similar with the Australasian Women in Emergencies Network. And just to recap a little bit, we are a membership of 1,200 women mainly, but men as well, around Australia and New Zealand, who work in, volunteer in, have a role in, have a passion about emergencies. And that extends beyond traditional lights and sirens, emergencies and response. And so what we've identified is women play key roles in an emergency context in their role as a mother, as a teacher, as a librarian, as a nurse in the health sector. So what we wanted to do is create an organisation and a network of women who play a role before, during and after in many different facets, because there was no network that connected women across all those different areas. And what we've done is we've brought together women who play different roles in a social setting and then in a professional setting, so we can share stories and information and conversation. What we've built, as you've described, is in a very extended family, a big family. And in terms of climate change and the network, is we committed very early on, we're 2.5 years old now, we committed early on to support national and international action regarding climate change. Some of us on the call know Greg through our roles, professional roles, and I jumped, as soon as I saw this thing that Greg was pulling together, I got on the phone and gave him a call and said, we've got this network and what can we do and how can we help? And fortunately, you know, we have been included. We were involved in the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action workshops. And we had our logo on the ad that was in the paper, which was fantastic. And so we've actually gone out to our membership and said, we are, you know, well behind Climate Council, the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action, and what can we do? And I'll continue to have that conversation with both of you and others to see how we as a network and our family can join with your family to make sure that, you know, united and combined, we've got lots of people committed and passionate about this and how we can have conversations and march forward. And I've seen a comment from Mel Taylor, some traction would be great. You know, I can see the frustration by Lesley, I don't know how you do it. I sat next to Will Steffen in a meeting a couple of years ago in Canberra, and he told the story of climate change and degradation of the barrier reef, etc., very calmly. And I don't know how he can keep so calm telling the same story. What alarmed me the most was the number of people that came up to him afterwards and said, oh, I had no idea. And I don't know how people can have no idea about this. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. I get carried away. I want to stop now and open the floor for some questions. I've got plenty more myself, but I know some of you will have questions, and I'm going to put somebody, I'm just going to see if she's still here. We have somebody, where is she? Oh, no, I was just looking for, oh, there's Kris. So Kris Newton is with us. I hope that she's still around. Kris is dialing in from the Blue Mountains. And Kris, if you're still there, I wouldn't mind just asking you to give us comments, thoughts and reflections on your work in the Blue Mountains with the bushfires last year and also the bushfires previously in 2013. What is the conversation around the bushfires and climate change in the Blue Mountains now?
I think it would be fair to say, as Lesley said, you know, the appetite for preparedness and resilience activities goes down steadily for a period of about 5 years after a major event. So in an ironic kind of way, this year has been great for our preparedness activities because the appetite has gone through the roof. But I think also it's fair to say that appreciation of the fact that climate change is directly responsible for what's happened to us this year. I'm not sure that most people necessarily see that COVID is probably also a direct response to climate change, but they certainly see what happened in the mega fires here and the months and months of anxiety and stress and smoke inhalation and evacuations and so forth that we suffered from were a direct result of climate change. I think, you know, as Amanda said earlier, there are some people who you just can't reach and you need to go, okay, that's your view. Let's put attention and energy into the people we can reach because they are currently in a more open, malleable, if you like, emotional and intellectual place than they were, say, pre-Christmas last year. So I'll choose to take that as the silver lining for what's happened in the past 6 months or so. It's been a very challenging time. COVID's made it.
I don't know who said this, Kris, but
Yeah.
they did say never waste a good crisis. And
Yeah, exactly, Lesley. And, you know, we have to look at it like that, that this is a fillip, in a sense, to the work that we've been doing since 2013, as Amanda knows, and Mel's part of all of that too. So, yes, we will continue to use that. So this year, our resilience and preparedness activities have included some of the recovery stuff in a COVID-safe environment, but we're actually been exempted from some of the COVID requirements in terms of the number that we can have, say, in an outdoor setting, for example, in New South Wales, thankfully, because we were scratching our heads wondering how on earth we were going to get more than 10 people together. We were going to have to do it 5 times or 10 times. But that's been relaxed for the recovery activities at least. So that's a good thing.
That's good.
Thanks, Kris. Now, Mel Parsons, your face popped up. I just, so Amanda and Lesley, Mel Parsons has recently been the lead researcher and launched the Australia's Disaster Resilience Index. So it's an index of resilient spots around Australia. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but Mel, a question for you in a climate context, and maybe you might have some questions of Lesley and Amanda, but how much did you consider climate change and climate risk in developing that resilience index?
Hi everyone. Hi. I guess the short answer is not at all, except for that there is now potentially some work that can be done in bringing together, and we didn't include environmental capital as an influence on disaster resilience either. This is that we designed it as an index that looks at the social, the economic and the institutional factors that influence the capacity for disaster resilience at a national scale. So I think it would be really interesting to now look at how that might sit beside, it's the same concept. It's about, we included adaptation. So it is about capacity as well it is also about adaptive capacity. So it'd be really nice to think about this now as it's a whole system. It's a complex system that's working together. Climate change is not only influencing the magnitude and severity of the external events that are happening, but it's changing the structures and the capacities economically, socially and institutionally that influence how well societies are going to be able to respond. And we've only taken a snapshot in time. If you predicted that forward 50 or 100 years, the picture is not necessarily going to be a happy one.
So Amanda and Lesley, have you had a look at climate change from a regional perspective, or is it always at a national perspective? Are you looking at that sort of disaster risk and climate change conversation?
Let me say, well, we've quite frequently produced, and we did on the Commission as well, regional focused reports, not so much because, I mean, climate is different in different regions, of course, so that does mean that different regions have different levels of risk, depending on if they're on the coast or the more inland or what their water supply is like, etc. I must say that our purpose mostly in doing regional reports is because people are interested in their local area, so that you get more traction and more interest and more media attention if you talk about local things. So that's been our approach, that to get people interested and conversing about these topics, doing it at a regional level is often more successful than putting out a report that's very international or even at a national scale. So it's more how we connect with people's interest, I think, that has driven our regional work. Amanda might say something.
No, I think that's a good summary.
Okay, so
Hi.
question.
Sorry, Sorry, can I jump in or?
Yes, no, I was just about to say I'd love other people to jump in now. So perfect timing.
Oh, sorry. I was just wanting to say that I'm working on something that maybe goes across to the work that people in this network are doing on recovery. I'm working with Amy Likens, who's on the call. As well, we're doing some work, just like a lot of groups around Australia are, doing some work on the mental health in young people of climate change. There's a lot going on in that space, looking at the ways that is having great impacts on the mental health of people. I don't know if Amy, you're about, and you want to talk about that, or?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, look, we just finished data collection on about 730 younger people, so ages 16 to 25, on mental health and concerns about climate change and psychological perceived distance to climate change. We ended up collecting data about early March to early June. And so I'm working on a conversation piece actually right now, as of yesterday on that. And right now we're just sort of looking at general trends, but we're going to be looking at a lot more detailed information about, you know, not just were you exposed to the bushfires or not, but how much of your postcode burned, how close were you to the fires and those kinds of things, and seeing how all of that relates to mental health impacts. So that's it.
Well, we'd be really interested in seeing a copy of whatever you produce, because one of our next reports is going to be on climate change and health. We haven't really done a big climate change and health report since we were on the commission, and we think it's about time, and certainly mental health will be a big part of that report. So that'll be great to have that information.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on a few groups with the American Psychological Association looking at these kinds of issues too. So some other connections as well. I'll be happy to contribute.
Great.
Thanks, Amy and Melissa. And I think that's a conversation that we'd like to continue to have, is what are your future reports are you looking at, and how can we contribute? We have, as I mentioned before, a huge cohort of women in working in lots of different sectors and spaces, not traditional response emergencies, but all the work that Mel's doing around resilience. And, you know, we can access a lot of information and share that with you. And we'd really love to work alongside the Climate Council and see how we can inform each other's work. That's a great outcome of this discussion that we're having today. So let's keep exploring. Yeah. Mel, you've got a question because you've just popped up.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in and say that, I'll say hi to Lesley, but also say that, some of us at Macquarie have got a project underway at the minute, which is looking at the importance and use of outdoor green space currently through, a combination of both COVID and post bushfire as well. So, and that includes quite a lot of mental health measures as well. So we can just contribute to that as well.
Yeah, I guess, somebody mentioned the silver lining earlier, and perhaps one of the silver linings of COVID, if there is one, is that I think it's been a real time of people reflecting what's really important to them. And, apart from their own health and their family and friends and their social interaction, I think it's really become clear how much green space and, even your little tiny local park has been incredibly important for people's mental health during this time, because often that's the only place, especially you people in Melbourne, have been able to get out and legally do anything. So, I really hope that some of the reflections about what's really important to people at a fundamental level will actually stay with us, because I think that really contributes to the climate change advocacy story. What is important, it's not about buying your next car. It's actually about keeping your family and friends safe and well. And let's hope we can keep focusing on that.
That's right. I think protecting what matters is the good thing, and identifying what it is you care about and then you don't want to lose. And I think maybe again that helps to tie into the climate change, environmental considerations as well.
So that's interesting. So Lesley and Amanda, in February, a number of women in the members of the network in Melbourne went along to the national what was it called, Climate Forum, what was it called? The Climate Summit in February in Melbourne. Yeah, so I was so excited at the conversations, the calibre of the speakers, the calibre of the conversations, the momentum, the line down the street, round the corner. And then COVID came and I felt like put a bit of a dampener on the momentum that we were gaining with respect to our advocacy in climate change. How are you feeling about what COVID, you know, yes, silver linings, but, you know, what's happened since February and that national summit? And the work that the council's doing, have you felt like you are moving forward, or you've had to stop, or what has COVID meant for your work?
Yeah, there's definitely been the whole range of challenges. So we have staff in Melbourne, Sydney, and obviously those offices were shut early, and none of the Melbourne staff have ever gone back. So there was firstly just a change of working that everyone's experienced. We then rejigged our plan for the year. We were going to be very extreme weather focused after the fires, but given the economic impact of COVID, we thought it was very important to pivot to doing much more on economic recovery and how to embed clean jobs into that economic recovery at a state or federal level. And as you'd know, the federal government's been pushing a gas-led recovery, but we've had very good traction with all the state governments in terms of a range of different clean jobs initiatives around, whether it's utility scale renewables to ecosystem restoration to energy efficiency, etc. And I think there'll be lots more coming out in that in the next few months. But also sort of trying to influence the national conversation on how the recovery should happen, and getting people to think more about what is the future we need to prepare for, rather than just the immediate economic crisis now. So our big sort of pieces for the year has been that clean jobs piece, tackling this gas-led recovery piece, and trying to do a whole lot of community education, journalist education, politician education around gas. There's not a very good understanding of how polluting gas is, that it's a fossil fuel, and that actually in terms of our current energy system and where it needs to go, there is some need for the existing gas in the system, and there's a transition out of that gas. But in terms of future energy systems, we don't actually need new gas, and that wouldn't be a solution for getting down power prices. So we've been doing a lot of that sort of communication piece. The extreme weather work that we've been doing after the sort of black summer, we worked with the emergency leaders on what could a summit look like in the absence of doing a big in-person event. And we decided to do 6 different events, which I know a number of you are a part of. So there were, I think, 4 or 5 roundtables and then 2 public events on either side through June and July. And we published a big piece of work with 165 recommendations on that is to government, also to the Royal Commission, and a number of the emergency leaders presented to the Royal Commission as well, and we did submissions to all the various inquiries and Royal Commission. So at the moment where we're at is, I think the Bushfire Summit was really useful in terms of bringing together lots of experts and creating lots of media coverage, getting the media re-interested in the climate story and the bushfire story. As you probably know, that it doesn't look like this season will be as bad for the East Coast with a kind of weak La Nina, but there is still risks there, and it can change relatively quickly. And of course, there's more of a risk of some of the grass fires and things like that, which you'd all know probably better than I would. But we've just been doing some journalist education around what is the extreme weather risks over the summer, what does that look like, and what we try and do each year is just get journalists prepared for what they might see, so that when it happens, they're not as captured by the very loud political interests. They've got that sort of basis of information to go on, which was really important, obviously, last year. Yeah, and then there's some behind the scenes advocacy work that Greg Mullins and the other emergency leaders are doing for whatever utility it will prove. We have met with Angus Taylor, I think it was last week or the week before, and we're meeting with the Emergency Services Federal Minister. We're also doing that at a state level as well, which I think will probably bear more fruit, to be frank. But, you know, it's still useful to be consistently having those conversations into the federal government too.
If I could add to that, yeah, I mean, I think the Climate Council pivoted really well given the circumstances. But one of the stories that we would have really liked to have pushed even more was the fact that we had a third bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef, which was quite severe. But it happened really at the height of the lockdown period, and getting any cut through on that, you know, under normal circumstances, it would have been a huge story. It's the third bleaching event in 5 years, and we've done a lot on bleaching and the impacts on the reef previously. But it was really, you know, literally pushing shit uphill really to get much traction on that. And I think most people in the community wouldn't actually realise that it's happened despite those efforts. The other thing we pivoted away from, we've been planning a big report on climate change and sport this year, you know, to really rest on Australians' love of sport. And that will still happen. You know, we've got a lot of sports people that will be spokespeople, etc. It will still happen. But we decided, you know, I think you'll understand why, that putting out a report on sport when nobody could actually go out and play sport was going to be a bit of a waste of time. So we're still working on that in the background. We've got it in our back pocket. We've got a few other things like that. But I think, you know, it comes back to this thing about not wasting a crisis. You also have to be really, really flexible. And I think, you know, one thing about the Climate Council is that we're still small enough. It's a lot bigger than it used to be, but it's still agile enough to actually pivot very, very quickly. And I think we've shown that this year.
Thank you. Are there questions? Because I've got heaps. I'll just keep rolling them if nobody else jumps in. Kath, are you looking at your mute button or no? Look, okay, look, I'm jumping because I can see Scotia there. I want to ask, just leveraging off from the sports conversation, Scotia Monkovich is the CEO of the Creative Recovery Network. Are you working with artists in your conversations around climate change? Is there any sort of key partnerships that you've got going there with artists and artist networks?
Yeah, we've done bits and pieces, not sort of a concerted effort with artists. So as they've come up, so the 2040 film, for instance, that came out, it's all a blur now. I don't know if it was last year or this year, but we did a bunch of work before to help sort of push that out. And other films that are on the climate side and books and things like that, we try and get out there. And similarly with other sort of creative initiatives around climate, but we're much more focused on the sort of the more political news media sort of side, but we do have social media platforms where we're a bit more creative in what we're putting out.
Can I just say too that I'm sorry I don't have my camera on because it's a bit dodgy at the moment, but it's Scotia from Creative Recovery, and we're working with a range of artists who work in that space that link practice on the ground into kind of capacity to be utilising their information and data that they gather into a lobbying context. So there is a real relationship to the work that you're doing, Amanda, and if you're interested, we can connect a range of people who are working across drought and climate change as being key areas of their practice.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I think two things to share with you is one, our social media platforms, which have a significant audience, we're always really looking for more content. So if there's things like that that would be sort of looking for an audience, we really appreciate seeing that. Similarly with reports that might be released, etc., we can give it a further audience. And we have another initiative as part of us called the Climate Media Centre. So the Climate Media Centre trains spokespeople, and some of you may have experienced this, trains spokespeople around the country who have sort of important voices on climate that aren't the sort of usual suspects to be out there communicating. So I mentioned before, firefighters, doctors, farmers, solar installers, a whole range of different people. I've trained over 1,000 people and are regularly placing them in the press. So whether there's an interest to do that, or whether there's like a report that's coming out, or the conversation article that you mentioned, Amy, we can create a bit of extra momentum around those things when they're coming out, where we know that they're coming, because we want to really be pushing this story as much as possible.
Our social media team are hungry for content. Don't you reckon? So yeah, if any of you have any of those sorts of things, it's really worthwhile letting us know in advance. And we have this fantastic social media team of fairly young people who do that sort of stuff really, really well. And they create great sort of magnification of those sorts of happenings.
I think there's a great opportunity. We have got a lot of women with a lot of diverse and interesting stories to tell that I think might be able to connect in. So we'll certainly take that up now. Kath, so patiently, thank you.
I'm just, hi. So, you know, climate crisis is an every person issue, obviously, and the solutions are, certainly. What does it mean to be a group of women sitting around on a Thursday night? What needs to be said to a group of women about this?
Amanda, do you want to go first?
Well, maybe I think women underestimate their power. I say we've got a lot of female staff, and one of my main pieces of sort of coaching advice, which I need to give myself often as well, is like step into your power. Like, don't second guess yourself, don't doubt yourself. I often say, like, one of my friends talks about being a middle-aged man in a meeting. He's like slightly balding, he's slightly overweight, he can talk, and he talks about how he walks into a meeting and everyone kind of 45-ish, everyone takes him very seriously all the time, no matter what he's about to say. So I often think about that when I'm very prepared but feeling a bit nervous. That, you know, be a mediocre man in a meeting and have that level of confidence. So I think that's the thing for us all to remember, is that we're fighting a really important fight, and we just need to be consistently stepping into our power and making the things that we know as influential and persuasive as possible, and not holding back.
Love that. Lesley?
Yeah, what can I say? I mean, absolutely. It was reminding me, as Amanda was speaking, of one of my favourite cartoons. I do a lot of work with gender equity at the university, and one of my favourite cartoons, I think, is from The New Yorker, with a man and a woman sitting across a table from each other, having a glass of wine, and the man is saying, "Just let me interrupt your expertise with my confidence." And every time I hear a man in a meeting sort of spouting, and all the women sitting there who often know more quietly, I think of that cartoon, and I think we've just got to step up and push in, and you don't have to be abrasive and aggressive, but not take a backward step either, you know, and we just have to keep working on each other, supporting each other to do that. But I think we can also remember that, you know, in most households, it's women that do, you know, make a lot of the consumer decisions, and the consumer decisions are really important in terms of our individual footprints and our community footprints. You know, it's often the women that are driving what is bought and what is not bought, and where people go, and how your kids, what your kids are exposed to in terms of ideas. So we have to keep doing that.
So you may have noticed we certainly have the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. It is not a diverse group.
Blokey?
Yeah, it's a bit blokey. They're a bit white, they're a bit bald, they're a bit old. I know a lot of these men well, they're fantastic, and I'd say it to their faces as well. But and you know, it's interesting you say that there are women, you've got a high proportion of women in your staff, and one of the questions I get asked in the context of the Women in Emergencies Network is, what special skill do women bring to emergencies that men don't? And my response is always the same. We bring all the skills. It's not better, it's not worse, it's not different. It's just that we just want to celebrate and recognise the fact that women do all the skills in an emergency context that men do. And there are some unique skills that we bring. Look, this is, you might say you don't know the answer to this, but do you think there's anything unique, apart from, you know, stepping into and using our secret powers, Amanda? Is there a special thing that women bring to the climate conversation that you've noticed that's a bit different from men? Or is there some sort of gender lens that we can bring to this?
I think so. I think empathy. I think when men talk about climate change, they're often talking about it at a distance. They're saying a lot of the people that are sort of prominent in the media are talking about electricity networks, and they're talking about serious economics, and they're talking about political decisions and blah, blah, blah. When this is about our future as human beings, And I think women can often be more confident in speaking in a more emotional way and drawing out that empathy about why is this important and why does it matter. Yeah, so I think trying to tap into that is important. Just a note on the emergency leaders. We do quite a bit of work of getting older men in suits in different contexts to speak on climate change, deliberately, because we think they're influential to particular audiences. We've done that with defence as well. But I think that's something we could do more of, is getting more women. The emergency leaders, unfortunately, as Greg went through sort of former chiefs, there just isn't as many female chiefs for the whole range of reasons that need to be changed.
Well, they're currently in the roles. They're not ex. So
Right,
I can't say anything yet. We need to wait for them to be ex.
Yeah, just to build on Amanda's point about empathy, and that women do, I think, communicate differently about why climate change matters. And I'll just share, years ago, and Amanda will remember this, when we were on the commission, and Will and I would get up and give a little science talk at the beginning of a forum, and then we'd sit and take questions. And Will and I would show these graphs of temperature rise, and, I would find them really kind of full of impact, but you put up a graph and at least 3/4 of the audience, just their eyes glaze over. You can actually see it happen. So I did this little experiment once. It was in Mackay, where I actually put my lifespan on the graph at the average temperature that I would experience over my lifespan. And then I did the same thing for my children and my hypothetical grandchildren that I don't have yet. And my grandkids, would live into 2100 and potentially be at an average of 4 degrees or something like that. And I put it up because I just thought I've got to make this science real to people in terms of what they really care about. And after these forums, we used to go down and, have a cup of tea and a biscuit with people in the audience. And this woman came up to me and said, when you put that graph up, I burst into tears, because it was the first time I felt, I've got grandkids, and for the first time I felt that I understand why climate change is so important. And so that became known as Lesley's grandkids slide. And the funny thing is that Will Steffen shows it in his talks. And it's I think, a way that maybe as a woman, a man might not have come up with that sort of a slide or communication tool. So I think we've all got to use what we're best suited to, and there's no one size fits all, and we need multitudes of voices talking about multitudes of things and doing what we feel comfortable with. But that was just one example.
Storytelling, indeed. It's one of our secret powers as women. We have hit 6 o'clock. I am going to, is there anyone that's got a burning question that they'd like to ask of Amanda or Lesley before I thank them very much and bid you a good night? No, that's good. All right. Look, thank you so much for your time. I think that both learning a bit more about what the Climate Council is up to, that's been really fantastic, and some tips and tools for conversations. But I think what's been really interesting for me is exploring opportunities for our group and our interest in emergencies, disasters, disaster risk reduction and resilience, bringing all different lenses and stories that we do as a network into the work that you're doing and how we can support each other. We've got some like Mel and Amy and Melissa, fabulous researchers contributing to very broad conversations, and maybe we can have some ongoing conversations and work more together. But we as a member of the AWE committee, and Kath here, she's on the committee as well, we have committed ourselves as a network to the work in climate change and climate change action, and certainly get behind the Emergency Leaders for Climate Action Climate Council. So we are strong supporters and advocates of the work that you're doing, and will continue to do so long as you keep working hard and doing great things, and we'd love to support you in that. And for taking the time, both of you, I know how busy you are, to join us today with our group, and the recording will be available. And I'll share that with the broader network as well. Come back to you with any questions that we have, but just to say thanks so much for your time, and I am looking forward to more conversations. And Lesley, you and me, Tasmania next May, I can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be great. Well, lovely to talk to you all. Thank you again for the invite. I think there's lots of things that we can do together. I think women do approach problems in a different way sometimes, and we've all got something to contribute. So thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you.
And I've popped in the chat a link to our social media manager and our Climate Media Centre person who's in charge of our extreme weather work, so that you've got their contacts. They'd love to hear from you in terms of any content that you've got coming out, or if you want to create more of a profile around anything that you could be putting out into the media. And I think as a group, you guys could have a profile in this public profile as well that could be built by the CMC too. So as Lesley said, I think there's lots of opportunity.
I can't wait, and it's been fabulous, and it's been great to get you more and more, and I hope you get to know us more and more as well. And for those that have dialed in today, thanks for coming along. It's great to see you. One day we will be together again.